Well, good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining on this kind of cold and wet day here in late November as we enjoy kind of a field visit in the comfort of our own homes here today with our virtual field day. I'd like to welcome you all to our virtual field day. And thank you to those who have attended our previous field days and offered your feedback. We've really appreciated that as we've worked to improve our virtual field day offerings over the course of this year. For those of you that are new to the Iowa Learning Farms, I'm Liz Ripley. I'm the Conservation and Cover Crop Outreach Specialist for our program. We are based on campus at Iowa State University. We were established in 2004, and our goal is to build a culture of conservation by working with farmers and researchers to implement practices that improve both water quality and soil health while remaining profitable. So we're really thrilled today to offer you a great look into what one particular of our farmer partners is doing in the Des Moines Lobe with strip till and cover crops. These events are made possible thanks to our partners, which include the Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship, Iowa State University Extension and Outreach, the Leopold Center for Sustainable Agriculture, the Iowa Department of Natural Resources, US EPA Section 319, Conservation Districts of Iowa, the Iowa Farm Bureau, Practical Farmers of Iowa, GrowMark, the Iowa Agriculture Water Alliance, Iowa Corn, and the Iowa Nutrient Research Center. So just a bit of housekeeping before we get going here. We do ask that you remain muted and your video cameras off while the video is playing. Once the video is done, we'll be inviting you to unmute to ask your questions of Mark. And at any time, you can submit those questions via the chat box, and I'll get those asked of Mark once the video is done playing. So without further ado, I want to just give a thank you to Mark Thompson, who is our speaker today and has been willing to share what he's doing, again, on the Des Moines Lobe with strip till and cover crops. And the benefit of doing these virtuals is that this event is being recorded. So if you or someone else needs to go back and look at the information that was shared today, you can certainly do that on our YouTube channel. We also ask that you submit the evaluation that you'll be receiving by email following today's program. So that'll come out a little bit later this afternoon. And so that'll include a link to this YouTube recording, so you can share that with folks as well. We're also offering free Iowa Learning Farm neck gaiters if you wish by completing your event evaluation and sending us your mailing address. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our recorded video of Mark to show us a little bit of what he's doing on his farm.
My name is Mark Thompson. We are now here in north central Iowa in Webster County, about 100 miles northwest of Des Moines. And we're in the Des Moines Lobe of flat black soils, highly productive. We have been strip till, no-till farming in this part of the world now for a little over 20 years. And we started incorporating cover crops into our soils, into our rotations here between about 7 years ago was the first time that we had cover crops. And we've been experimenting with different mixes, timing, applications. The last few years now we've been involved in raising our own seed. We raise cereal rye for seed production, and we've also experimented with relay cropping. So we are actually standing in a soybean stubble field that we relay cropped this summer. So we had rye that we took to maturity with soybeans growing underneath. We harvested the rye at approximately the 20th of July and then harvested the soybeans at normal time this fall. This year we were extremely dry in this part of the country. The dry weather affected our relay cropped soybeans and rye this year. Not quite as good as we had hoped for, but still decent. This is a field that had been in continuous corn for over 20 years that we planted soybeans in, where we're at right now for the first time in that time frame. So we were excited about it. Market conditions changed it, but right now the cover crop is growing. We have a mix of oats, rye, and rapeseed growing in here right now. It's a little sparse because of the dry weather, and we're hoping here, the one unique part about this field is we had 2 inches of rainfall here about 36 hours ago. and it's been cool and cloudy since then, but the conditions are still good. We're able to be out here in the field because of the soil structure and what we've been able to do here over the years. Yeah, so we're standing in the field right now. This is where we did the relay cropping. So most of the rye that you see behind me is volunteer rye that came from the harvest in July. That's why it's got the size, and it's got excellent root mass already established. Now the 2 inches of rain that we did have only soaked up about 3 inches because we were so dry, but we have been able to get some pretty good structure over the years where we've been able to do a lot of things. We've got excellent structure of the soil, the soil PEDs, and we've been able to do a lot with it. The night crawlers have already, you can see the holes from the night crawlers, but they've moved lower now with the cooler temperatures. We've got a lot of the structure of the rye already going here. The soybeans here were harvested about 2 weeks ago, and so a little bit later than normal in this part of the country, but did a nice job. So one of the biggest things that I've seen over the years of doing what we've been doing, and now especially since we've incorporated the cover crops, is just the structure of our soil. This is a Nicolette soil that we're standing in right now that has a tendency to be a very tight and cloddy soil when it's wet. And the big thing that we've been able to do is take from that structure to a crumbly, beautiful structured soil, extremely high productive. It's our highest CSR soils that we have in Webster County, and that's all been done with the no-till and now with cover crops incorporated into it, strip till. It has been continuous corn for so many years that we've had a high organic matter. This field right now runs about 4.5% to 5% organic matter, which we've been able to double since we started doing this. Bottom line's been excellent for us. This whole system that I started years ago was basically for economics. I looked at strip till, no-till as a labor savings and economics to cut out tillage. So now we're standing in a field. This was where we had rye straight production. So we raised rye for seed. This was harvested approximately the 23rd of July. We came right in that night, harvested and baled up the straw, and then we drilled beans the next morning, trying to double crop soybeans. So we have volunteer rye growing right now, and the soybeans, they got up, and then we had a killing frost at the end of September, and they didn't make it. So they ended up being soybean cover crop along with the rye. The thing that we've noticed is the excellent from the legume, the nodulation, and things that we brought back into this field. This has actually been in rye production now 2 of the last 5 years. We've raised seed rye off of this field. So it's working well. The structure is, again, very good. One of the main things we've seen with the cover crop is the infiltration rate of our heavy downpours that we've had the last few years up until this year, to where we have very little ponding anymore in our soils. Even though this farm does have some pockets on it, and it does have some roll to it, but we've minimized the amount of standing water we've had on these farms drastically by using the residue, the crop residue, and the cover crops. On this farm, on this field, the rye, we raised for seed, so we have all our own seed that we use on the rest of the approximately 900 acres of crop ground that we seed, and the straw. We sold the straw off of here too, which is a good money maker. And the soybeans that we used here were discard soybeans from the local elevator that they were getting rid of. So it was just cost of seeding. Yeah, I've been the oddball out here for years since we've started this whole system. We're in a highly intensive tillage area, black flat soils of north central Iowa. It doesn't bother me. You have to have a kind of a thick skin to be one of the first people to do this kind of stuff. I've always had a different outlook on life. It was something I learned from my grandfather. He was always an innovator and did a lot of new things when they first came out in the last 100 years. And he gave me that spirit, and I've kind of incorporated that into what we do here over the last 20 years. So I wish he was still alive to see it, because I think he would be very impressed with some of the things that we're doing here. He quit moldboard plowing back in the 60s. And we've taken that and added to it over the last 40 years. So now we're looking at some of the equipment that we utilize in my operation. Like I said, I don't farm huge, but I try to be efficient. So we strip till all of our corn and we no-till our soybeans. So here's just a little shot. I do run a Soil Warrior for my strip till machine. We have the capability to variable rate our strips as far as our fertility of one product. So I just have a single bin that we mix everything together and then put it on at a variable rate. The Soil Warrior machine is a coulter machine, so that it allows us for quick, fast spring strips. We only do spring strip tillage on our farm. And so it's a coulter machine that we run anywhere from 2 to 4 inches deep. We pull it quick and fast. This machine averages between 9 and 10 mile an hour when we're strip tilling, and makes for quite the efficiency in our system. We also we have an older planter that we use, nothing fancy, but it makes a beautiful seed bed and it plants very well. So it works good for us. It is a pneumatic. We built it. I had it built to certain specs. It does use air pneumatics for down pressure, has the big airbags on it. I also have air actuated row cleaners, which is, I think, the most important part of strip till, is to be able to clean the residue off before I make my seed zone. And so we do that on this system all in one using the pneumatics. So it works good for that. Yeah, this machine is only 20 foot wide, so it's 8 row 30, but we run it fast and I can cover the same ground that I used to do with my 12 row 30 that I had before because of the speed. And it works great. The higher the speed, the better job it does, actually. Yeah, I've had several strip till machines over the years from when we started. We started with a combination coulter machine, then we went to a knife machine. We had a few of those. I do a lot of continuous corn, so I needed a machine that could handle the residue. The coulter was the best system for that. And this machine, I invested in this a few years ago. It's not cheap, but it does exactly what I want. It's built to last, and it's a strip till machine I'm going to have for years to come. I can upgrade the technology on it as it changes, and the speed of the unit as far as how it works does a beautiful job, and it handles continuous corn beautifully.
All right, so while Mark's getting his camera and unmuting himself, feel free to put those questions in the chat box to have Mark address those, or you're also welcome to unmute and ask your questions directly of Mark, and we'll see how many we can fit in today. So first one that came in, what's your method for cleaning and storing that rye that you're harvesting for seed?
Well, the main thing that I utilize is we try to do as good a job as possible harvest-wise. This year, we never even had it professionally cleaned, and it was able to be utilized through our commercial application equipment. We fly all ours on, and so we didn't even have to clean it this year. It was clean enough. We store it actually in wagons. Right now, we have utilized grain air bins that I utilize for corn storage. We clean them out, put the rye in, run the fans, cool them down, and then use it as seed about a month and a half later.
And what's your seeding rate for that particular field that you're harvesting the rye off of?
When we're going for harvest, we like to stay up in that 50 to 70 pounds drilled, that type of seeding rate. But for just straight cover crop, then we cut it back down, rise in the 40-pound rate, 30 pounds of oats, 2.5, 4 pounds of rapeseed.
So you mentioned fertilizer in your, as we toured your strip till machine. What is your fertilizer program for both corn and soybeans? How many pounds of N per bushel of corn are you utilizing?
We're trying to cut down our nitrogen usage quite a bit. We like to stay in at 1/2 pound to 7/10 of a pound per bushel of yield. So we're looking for efficiency. We split apply all our nitrogen. We usually shoot for between 50 to 60 pounds of actual nitrogen in the strip. We come in side dress, then another 30 to 50 pounds of liquid 32%. And then if needed, we'll come in with wide drops and finish out the season depending on what type of system or what the weather's been typically. But we try to be, we're cutting back on nitrogen usage as much as possible.
Just kind of circling back to the rye that you're growing, are you using it exclusively for yourself or do you sell any to your neighbors?
Right now, it's usually, most of it is for myself. I have sold some in the past. It really depends on how many acres we get in and what kind of production. So we'd like to have more to sell if possible.
And what's your plan for that soybean residue?
That the soybean residue that we were standing is it will be planted to corn next year. So we'll come in and strip till in the spring. I'm entirely spring strip till. And so we'll come in, hopefully, depending on weather, we like to try to get our strip tilling done the first part of April, and then be ready to plant corn after the 20th, between the 15th and 20th.
So you're not going to come in and knock those soybeans down at all. You're just going to strip till right into it.
Strip till right into them. Yep.
Hey, Mark, this is Jackie. I'm
Yes.
gonna ask you a question here. So it seems like you're having a good time out there, even though you're doing some crazy things, like what some people might say are crazy in your neighborhood, right? I
That's
know
right.
you, and you seem to be enjoying yourself. So it brings a lot of creativity to sort of cover up for when, for instance, you didn't get a harvest off the beans, but it didn't matter because you got the beans from the co-op. They were leftover bean seed, right? So it didn't matter.
Correct.
Okay, so you also manage other people's farms. Are you able to talk them into doing any of these things?
We've been able to incorporate some of our ideas. We like to utilize them on our own farms first. All the gentlemen that work in my office here, we all farm also. And we've been able to put some on certain farms where they fit right, where we have the right clientele and what we're looking for. So yeah, we have been. And yeah, we like to have fun. That's the name of the game. So we incorporate that into a lot of things that we do. Yeah, it's hard work and it's a job and it's a business, but yet we like to make it fun. And I incorporate my kids. They help me out a lot and that type of thing. So it's a fun job.
So based on your personal experience and then also through your professional experience as a farm manager, what's the biggest impediment to getting more cover crops on the land? Are there team strategies that you think that could be useful to reduce risk, costs of screw ups, increase learning and results?
One of those things I think that comes into play a lot is it's just that fear of change. And that's what comes into play often. A lot of people are just, it's easy to do what you've always done. And I always kind of put this into context, and say, how much technology do we use that our grandfathers used? Do we have rotary dial phones? Do we still use the switchboards and that type of thing? No, we've moved way past that. But yet we're still doing a lot of things in farming that we did 60, 70, 80 years ago. Still the same way. Bigger equipment maybe a little different, but still the same concept. And I there's better ways of doing things. And this is kind of some of the stuff that I've started with. So we like to utilize that and the technology and to move forward.
So what are just some of the resources you looked to when you were learning how to do all this, and how long has it taken to kind of get your system down to where you're happy, or maybe you're not happy yet with where you are?
What I always tell people is I'm never done learning. So we go to a lot of meetings. We go and visit people. The internet is a great resource. You can contact people and find out. And so, you got to be willing, first of all, to learn. I remember one of the first meetings we went to, a person talked about, he said, the biggest hurdle you're going to run into right off the bat is right here. And once you get past that and be open-minded, there's a lot of things that you can do. Because if you do not want to make it work, it'll fail pretty easy. And I've always said that. But if you're willing to make things work, I've not done it all perfect by far. You got to learn. But you got to make sure you don't make the same mistake twice. And so you want to keep moving forward and those kind of things. So we're always trying something. I was at a meeting a few years ago and the gentleman talked about a big business, how much money they spend on research and development every year. And all companies do it. And he said, how many of you farmers do something new and out of the ordinary or off the cuff every year? You know, and pretty much everybody doesn't do anything different, you know. But he says, figure out and take 5% of your land and do something you've never done before or no one would ever think you should do. He said, just try it. And so that's one of the things that I've incorporated into my operation is we're doing different and crazy things almost every year. It might be 30 acres, 20 acres, but we're going to try something different.
So you mentioned when we were in that first field that you had a mixture of oats, rye, and rapeseed. What do you view as the benefit of including rapeseed in your mixture there?
It gives us a brassica just to diversify the root structure, some of the, in the soil life. We like to have different species in there. It's an efficient brassica. It doesn't cost as much as radishes and some of the other things. And we get a little better growth out of it. Radishes, we can get good germination, but we don't get the benefit out of them. If you were to able to plant behind small seed production, small grains, then you can get some of that. I have raised them in the past and they're amazing what they'll do, but they won't do it from Labor Day on. We just don't have enough growing season. So we've tried to use something else that isn't quite as expensive, and rapeseed / canola works pretty nice.
So a couple questions here and related to using cover crops and how it impacts your nitrogen fertilization. So do you think you can credit any of your cover crops as nitrogen fertilizer? And do you take that into account as you're calculating what you put on? And have you done any tile testing to see changes in nitrate concentration on your farms in particular?
I have not done any testing as far as on water leaving the farm. We do have a lot of drainage, tile drainage on our properties. Been fortunate to have landowners that have been willing to invest in the drainage systems, and it makes a world of difference in production. But as far as nitrogen credits, no. We like to utilize the soil to be productive and start to release some of that nitrogen that's in that organic matter. We have some farms that are extremely high organic peat soils. I have a farm that runs 15 to 20% organic matter. And those farms, that type of soil releases nitrogen naturally, abundantly, to where we barely put any nitrogen on continuous corn production. And it was kind of scary to take that to yield the first time we tried it, but it's amazing what that farm will do. And so we take that back into where we've been able to double our organic matter on some of the other farms doing continuous corn. That organic matter releases nitrogen, and what we always say, we want the soil to be soil. Let it do what it does naturally. Most of us farmers, when we first got started, we're trying to manipulate it to do what we want. And that's not what I do. I try to let the soil be what it is naturally, and it'll give back to me and let me raise my crops and be efficient. And so that's what we try to do.
Have you done any soil temperature checks at the time of planting between the strips themselves and the spaces in between?
Yeah, so I'm a lot of continuous corn, so we have solid residue at time when it comes to spring strip till. But typically we'll see 5 to 10 degrees. Now that's sunny days, you're going to buffer out, back out through the night, that type of thing. But it does give us, especially if you get a good clean strip, and when everything works right the way you want it to do, it works great. Now we've had to do some serious plan B, C, D, E, and F the last few years with the crazy weather we've had, but we've been able to make it work. So.
What are you using technology-wise for guidance, your variable rate, and keeping track of all that?
Yeah, so I'm one of the different. I do not use RTK. I use a step down, so we're in the sub 4-inch range. I run an 8-row strip till machine and a 12-row planter, so it's not perfect, but it's pretty darn close. And what I always say, it's closer than I can drive if I was using the markers. And I don't have a fancy, I don't even have guidance on my planter tractor. I have a mounted planter. If you get your strips straight, that planter will stay right in the strips. And I've done it that way for years. We do use guidance on the strip till machine to lay out the rows and the strips. But
Yeah,
other
there's a
than
lot
that,
of, oh, so good. Finish your thought. Sorry about that.
no, that's, I mean, we utilize the technology, but we're not at the top. So we're kind of the step back, step down, and it works well. I enjoy it. It works good.
There's a lot of great questions coming in. I'm trying to keep track of them all here so I don't skip any. How do we try things that may be money losers when we're forced to pay high cash rent? So I don't know which hat you're going to wear there.
That's a difficult question. You know, you've got to utilize some of those things because they are a little bit of, you know, the first time you try it and the first decisions you make, they're not always the best ones. And but you got to learn from it. You make that decision on a smaller acreage, so you minimize loss if you have that point. Some of us, or most of us, we do have land that's not high dollar cash rent. It's either family land, owned land, owners that are very interested in this type of thing. That's one of the things that I've learned over the last several years is I have a lot of rented land, and communication with my owners has given me the feedback that they're extremely interested in this, and they want to be a part of it, and they're willing to work with us to make that happen. And that's some of the things that I think a lot of people need to discuss with their landowners, especially absentee landowners that are away from here in Midwest and in Iowa, because they have a different outlook than a lot of people think. And we've learned that through our business also. And so there's a lot of times compensation both ways to make some of these systems work. And then the other part of it is nowadays is some of the new things that are coming down the pipe is companies that are willing to pay us to do certain things with cover crops, carbon sequestration, things like that, and eventually maybe carbon trading, carbon credit. That was one of the first things that I had in my toolbox when I started this system. It's still 20 years and it's really not much closer, but the potential is that it could be. And if someone's willing to pay me extra for something I'm already doing that I see as a benefit, that's a double bonus in my book.
Wonderful. Larry, it looks like maybe you wanted to ask a question.
Yes. Years ago, when we raised a lot of oats and I wanted to sell straw, my dad said, "You're selling straw, you're selling the farm. Why are you selling your ryegrass straw?"
Well, we sell some of it, and that's the thing. I like to, if I could get all to relay cropping, Larry, that's what I want to get to where I'm leaving almost all the straw in the field. So when we're relay cropping, we're cutting the heads off of the rye, basically just above the soybean canopy. And it's an easy system with the, here's a picture that we're putting up here. And that's what my rye looks like in a relay system. So there's 12-inch rows of soybeans underneath. We'll come in and harvest just the heads and leave the straw in there. And after a couple days, the beans start to fill in the tracks from the combine, especially with good moisture. That's what it looks like as we're harvesting. On the left, you can see where the heads have been cut off. But it works. I don't like to sell the straw because you're correct on that, Larry, because you are selling nutrients. But it
Thank
is a
you.
point, and in certain fields where we utilize it, we have a high organic matter, we have fertility and that type. And then we compensate it back with fertilizer to make sure we're not selling it all.
So this question came in. So asking from your farm management side, how do you work with landlords to help them encourage their tenants to adopt new practices, working out who pays the extra costs and figuring out those logistics? How do you guide those conversations?
Most of the time it takes a lot of time. There's a lot of communication, but you have to open that conduit to get that communication started. And like I said, we've been really surprised at how open a lot of owners are to some of these changes. And there's a niche out there for that. And that's where we've stepped into here in our business to incorporate some of the things that we've learned firsthand into some of our managed properties. And the response has been great. But you need to discuss it with them. You need to invite them out if they ever come back to the farm, and show them what you're doing and show what it looks like and the differences and those kind of things, because most of them are interested in making those changes. Now, to make the economics work and who pays for what, those are all discussed and sat down. There's a lot of programs that are available for the operators and the owners, depending on your lease types, that can be utilized to get you off the ground and get you started. And we've utilized those. We have firsthand knowledge of how those work. We've been in and out of them, the changes over the years, but there is some opportunities there. So you need to investigate all the things that'll work for you, and especially in your operation.
So you mentioned you're doing it for economics, the switching to no-till and strip-till. How do you measure your returns on using cover crops and no-till? Have you run the numbers on changes in input costs, crop yields, variability? Do you run your profit analysis on your fields?
Absolutely. The biggest thing that we've seen by incorporating the cover crops is the weed control part of it, especially in the no-till situation. And I've told this to a lot of people. When you're no-tilling, especially in soybeans, you're not bringing up new weed seed to plant every time you do the tillage. And a lot of people think I'm nuts. And I said, just try it. It's amazing. When you leave that surface alone, or cover it with a cover crop that inhibits the weed growth, it's amazing. We've been able to cut down on a lot of farms now, again, depending on years, but no-tilling soybeans with one pass herbicide application of burn down after the crop's planted, planting green. I tried it this year in corn. We planted corn into foot-tall rye that had been stripped earlier in the spring. Ideal scenario. I love that. If I could do it every spring, it would be unbelievable if the weather would cooperate. But that's an awesome system. And it laid down a nice mat of rye that we came right in with one shot of herbicide and had excellent weed control. So when you think about, everybody always tells me, or I talk about it with people, what does that tillage pass cost you? And everybody, well, it's free. I've got the tractor, I've got the equipment, I got the time, it doesn't cost me anything. And I'm like, really? And I kind of joke around with people that the fuel man brings fuel to your house for free. He doesn't do that at mine. But, those kind of things. And if you knock out just in no-till soybeans, we easily figure it's $50 an acre in tillage. Well, you can do a lot of things with cover crop costs and weed control if you just do that. And then wear and tear and labor and time saving. What's your time worth? Do you really need to sit in the tractor and just back and forth for hours at a time? So yeah, we incorporated that into our system.
So this question noted that they've had inconsistent results with aerial seeding into corn. What helps you be successful in doing so on your land?
I'm going to be honest, it is variable, highly variable, but it's the best system that we've been able to utilize to get the growth that we like to see. We don't always get the best crop. Now there's some pictures here. This is like the best case scenario. These were aerial applied rye. It was just gorgeous. And there's nothing more fun, than harvesting crops when you have a nice green cover crop growing in between. And over the years, this is what we shoot for. This year, we didn't barely have any rain. Now this is a picture that we took in the spring. This is the 1st of March after the snow melts. And if I could get this every year, this is what I shoot for. It doesn't happen, but we're experimenting too. We're looking at some different ways of seeding into standing crop with ground rigs, different timing. We're doing some research here the next summer, seeding cover crops at lay-by time. We've done some work with reduced population corn to get more sunlight in, to get cover crops started quicker. We've had some good experience with that. We're going to run another one of those tests again this coming spring. Planting corn at 18 to 20,000 population But with a flex hybrid that'll throw 2 to 3 years of plant, it's amazing. It'll yield pretty darn good, pretty close to what it is normally, and you get your cover crop started a little bit earlier too. So just some different ideas, things that I've learned from going to a lot of different meetings, stuff like that. So. But aerial seeding isn't great. If it doesn't rain, it doesn't amount to as much as it should. But the best part is a lot of people are upset. You don't get as good growth in the fall, but by spring, it's amazing what kind of germination and what kind of stand you'll have for spring cover by the end of March. I've always been shocked. And I've even done some spring seeding of cover crop, some rye. It's pretty decent. Now it's my own seed, so I didn't have to go out and pay top dollar for it, but it was interesting. It was a year where we didn't have the right weather. We still like to drill it, especially if it's going into production. You get a lot better stand, more consistent. And that's the biggest thing with raising seed rye. You got to have a good stand. If you don't have a good stand, you're barely breaking even. So.
On this question, I know I got Mark licked here too. Maybe he wants to chime in, but this particular person's a landowner and they're trying to encourage their renter to put on cover crops. He has cattle and spreads solid manure, so the dry on the surface, and says that's incompatible with cover crops. Any information you can share? I don't know if you have any experience with manure in your systems or farms that you manage, or if Mark wants to hop in on this one.
We've had good luck. I have an operator that utilizes that system. He grazes the cattle off eating the rye. With the corn stalks, he says we get much better utilization of the stalks because the cattle are in trying to find the rye. They'll eat more stalks and husk as they're in there. The dry manure would be excellent. I would love to have somebody with livestock, if not my own, to utilize in my system. That's the one thing that we don't have that we're trying to move forward to. And maybe my next generation, when he comes back from college, that's something we're kind of looking at, possibly to incorporate. But how about you, Mark? What have you seen?
So I've not done any research on it, but just driving around the countryside and observing what's happening, it seems to work well. One thing that we've had conversations with various people on campus about is, don't let the manure stop you from planting a cover crop. So just like you were talking, yeah, we know we know how to do it with aerial seeding or broadcast seeding. We know that there could be some variability there. We know that we get, better uniformity with the drill, but if we wait to seed it until after we've done the manure, well, time may get the best of us and it may not happen. So go ahead and put the manure on, and I'll say that whether it's liquid or dry manure, go ahead and put it on and seed, just like you normally would. Yeah, depending on, the type of equipment you're using, it may reduce some of the biomass, but overall, you're still going to be benefiting from having that cover crop out there. Anecdotally, one thing that I have seen is the dry manure, if you're able to do that ahead of strip tillage, it really does work nice because then you just don't have I'll call them the clumps, right? You're able to push that out of that row and have a nice seed bed for planting still. If you're not doing strip tillage and you're in a no-till system, now you're probably relying on those residue row cleaners to kind of move some of that out of the way if you do have some clumps, but it still should work fairly easily.
Great.
Yeah, I've had some experience with some guys that use the low disturbance manure, especially in the liquid system, right into their cover crop. And it's amazing. You can't barely tell they were in there. And it does a nice job. I know a guy out in Indiana that does, he seeds his cover crop in his liquid manure and things like that. So, there's a lot of things that you can think outside of the box and make it work. But manure is an excellent source in a system like ours. And I think you can make it work.
So speaking of banding nutrients, Mark, how do you manage fertility in a strip till system as far as PK and the micros? Do you solely band with your soil warrior or do you broadcast any fertilizer as well?
Since I have a smaller applicator as far as the strip till machine, I do utilize some surface application of nutrients. I do like to do it prior to strip tilling so I can incorporate some of it into my strips. I do have some of the system where I will just use the strip till machine for my nitrogen application and my P and K will go on variable according to my grid samples and that type of thing. So sometimes it's timing and how it works. My strip till machine, I don't like to do a lot of tillage. So we typically only run it a few inches deep, and we'd like to run it fast. That machine works better at 9.5 mile an hour than it does at 6. And so that's why I pull an 8. I can pull an 8-row machine going 10 mile an hour and get just much done as I can a 12-row at 6. And so it works, and it incorporates that surface a little bit too, as far as utilizing the dry fertilizer. But I do a combination. You know, it depends on the year, depends on the farm, what we're shooting for levels. If we're increasing capacity, the biggest thing that I see with restrictions on strip tilling is when you get a full load of fertilizer is just how much you can get done per load. And you know, when you're running a 400-pound mix out of a 6-ton applicator box, you don't get much done. But if you can make it work, and I try to shoot for around a 40-acre load, and then I can get a lot done that way.
And you're determining your variable rates based on annual soil sampling?
We do a typical 4-year rotation.
Okay.
We're down to 2.5-acre grids right now, started at 4s. We're in our 6th rotation, about 25 years of variable rate fertility.
So with heavy residue between the rows, do you see a change in weed emergence and management?
Yeah, so like I mentioned earlier, I do a lot of continuous corn. So we throw a lot of residue in between there. Now it's amazing. One of the things that we've started here a few years ago is we start to size our residue / plant livestock food at harvest with our corn head. And so if we can get that size down a little bit smaller, my livestock / night crawlers, they go nuts on it for the 3 months in the fall or 2.5 months after harvest, and then in that 60 days in the spring before corn planting. And I've even seen on some of my bean stubble fields where the night crawlers have almost taken all of the surface residue off of it. They'll make it'll be 18-inch diameter circles of black with a pile of residue in the middle where the hole is. And those livestock, you got to get them working for you. And it's amazing what they'll do. And so I've got probably more head per acre, pounds of worms than you would if you had several head of cattle per acre on your farm. So.
And someone had a follow-up, how is your corn residue sized at harvest? Is that done with this type of combine head you're running?
Yeah, we use a chopping head. So I use a Drago head. I like the way it works. It's not as pretty as some of the other companies' heads as far as slicing it off, but it processes it just what I want. I actually want a stub that's rough, so it'll break down and get the organisms into it. I don't want to cut off clean. So people think that's another one. People think I'm crazy, but I run my knives dull because I want it to fray it off as it breaks it off. And then it breaks it down. And so when you get a leaf that's down to the size of a dime, Nightcrawler can handle that, and he'll pull it down in the hole 2 feet if you leave it on something that he can get a hold of. So that's what we use. Like I said, it's not pretty, but it does exactly what I want it to do.
So this person's looking for your top 3 keys for success for someone thinking about trying strip till for the first time.
What I always say is strip till isn't really different than regular what you shoot for in your system of return and maximizing yield and that type of thing. In our part of the country, first thing is drainage. Now, we all don't have perfect drainage. We're not able to go out and perfectly pattern tile our fields. But if you can, what you can do, that's the first step. The second step that I always want to see is know where your fertility is and where you're at, where your goal is, and be efficient. We always have a tendency that fertilizer is cheap, we'll throw an extra 30% on. I don't do that. I want to be on 30% less and get the same yield. And so we cut it close, but we really watch the weather to see what happens to make that work. And the third one, which could easily be up at the top also, but you've got to be willing to make that change. And if you go into it half-hearted, or another word, you're going to not get good results. But you got to have an open mind. You got to be willing to make a mistake, learn from it, and move forward. Now, start small. If you want, one of the first things when I started no-tilling, I remember the first day I was no-tilling soybeans. And I thought to myself, for the last 25 years, what the heck have I been doing? And spending and wasting my time with all this tillage. This works great. And then when it come to harvest, it was even better because the yield was just as good or better. And I'm like, wow, this is amazing. So what I always tell people, if you don't want people to see it, put it in the middle of the field somewhere where no one else can see it except you, and just try it out. It's amazing. And then we went from there to strip till. I have tried no-tilling corn. I've no-tilled continuous corn. I've no-tilled corn in the soybean stubble. My planter's not perfectly set up for that yet. If I get to the point when I upgrade my next planter and I can have fertility on the planter, that is a possibility of where I'm going to go, and I might not even be strip tilling after that, because I've been able to do some pretty good things without it. And if I could get the fertility to go along with it, I think there's opportunities that even in our cold, heavy, wet soils, you can make it work. Because once you get the structure of that soil changed, it's amazing. Like we're planting corn now in the spring, the soil doesn't look like it's dry enough, but the structure of it is so beautiful, you can plant right into it and it doesn't stick to anything. It's amazing. It works great.
This person was curious if you've seen any yield drags with your use of cover crop, and if so, for how long did you notice those?
I personally haven't seen the yield drag from the cover crops. Now, termination sometimes is an issue. You've got to be on top of it. Don't hold the horses if you're trying to terminate that cover crop, because you'll end up with problems. And when you have rye that goes to shoulder high because you didn't get it killed, you're going to have some problems. So we always err on the high side to make sure we get it killed. Now, the biggest thing there is to make sure that you have somewhat a homogeneous seed product when you're seeding it. Know where you're getting your seed from. That's the main reason I grow my own, because I know exactly what it is. Because you want that crop all at the same stage when you go to kill it. If you don't know what kind of seed you have and you have different varieties and different maturities in there, you'll have some that's almost boot stage and you'll have some that's coming out of the ground, and it takes different rates to kill different stuff. So that's one of the main things. But we haven't really seen, I've made other mistakes that have limited my yield, but not really from the cover crop.
And for clarification, this person was asking, you're using rye both ahead of corn and soybeans, correct?
I am. That was another challenge. People always told me, well, you can't raise rye in front of corn. That won't work. Well, heck, I planted corn this spring into foot-tall rye with a nice black strip in between, and I let it grow another 3 weeks before we killed it, and it was beautiful. Once that stuff started melting down, the corn took off, and that's time-release fertilizer out of that rye all summer long. As soon as those night crawlers start pulling it down, it's amazing what it'll do. So I've made it work. I mean, you got to know what you're doing, but it's not a hindrance like everybody talks about.
So
the allelopathy that everybody always talks about. I don't know.
So yeah, kind of thinking of like jumping on that potential issues. Have you had any issues with armyworms or other bugs with your cover crop usage?
We've been fortunate. I go to a lot of meetings and people talk about slugs and all of the things that come along with it. Now, I don't know if it's just luck that I've gotten. Our spring season is pretty short. So, we don't deal a lot with a lot of extra growth. I mean, there's some years where we'll get a nice stand and we'll have a foot tall rye at planting time. Most of the time it's not. So I think that makes a difference. We're not like we're 150, 200 miles south of here where you get a lot more growth and more potential. When she's cold, she's cold. We're froze solid and below zero and those and that helps us, I think, throughout that. But no, I've never had problems with armyworms or slugs or any of that type of thing. So I think I count myself fortunate, but we really don't do anything special for it either.
All right, we've got time for a couple more questions that I've gotten in here. Is tile drainage necessary for you to implement soil health practices such as no-till and diverse cover crop mixes?
I wouldn't say it's totally necessary, but it greatly improves the outcome. And I have been a huge proponent of drainage my whole life. I learned it from my great mentor here at my job and has promoted it over his entire lifetime. And it is still the key to production in flat north central Iowa. So we do what we can with the money that we have. But one of the things that really has helped is as we've let the soil be soil, the structure has changed to where that drainage isn't near as important as it used to be. You still get 6-inch rain, you're still going to have issues. But that 1 to 2 inch rain, the soil can handle it no problem. Just like in the video, we were driving my pickup out in the field 30 hours after it had a 2-inch rain, and it barely even stuck to the tires. So those are some things. We've seen it in the spring a couple of years ago where we had tremendous wet springs. We were planting corn a day before anybody else was even thinking about going to the field, just because we were driving on the rye and driving on the corn stalks, and it worked great.
So someone was curious of your opinion on potentially using some different types of leases. So kind of from your, well, maybe personally and professionally, going to like 50-50 crop share so they can maximize conservation practices. Any thoughts on different types of leases to help with that?
There's all kinds of leases, and you can make them work to the way you want them to work. And again, it comes down to communications. You need to sit down with your landlord, your owner, and your operator, depending on which side of the bus you're on. But you can make it work. And you know, as we all know, crop share leases, you're more involved from the owner's standpoint, from that side of it. If you don't want to have anything to do with it and you don't care how somebody takes care of your farm, cash rent works great. And we have clients that like to do that. But I also have a lot of clients that want to be involved. And, you know, a crop share is still fair, it's most fair. You deal with the risk, you share it. You deal with the production risk, you deal with the marketing risk. And it really is helpful in incorporating some of these projects, different things as far as how costs for all the conservation practices for cover crops, those kind of things. So, and then the gamut is 100% in between there. So you can run a variation from one end of the spectrum to the other. And we have several different lease types that we incorporate this into.
All right, so I've got one more question currently, and then I'm going to share some CCA information. So how many landowners in your 10-mile radius are doing something similar to you? And about what percent of the farm ground would you say? They're curious about the distribution or penetration that you've had with your practices and influence.
I'll have to admit, this fall, I've seen the most not tillage that I've seen ever in our 10-mile radius. And I'm not going to say it has anything to do with what I do, but it's great to see. And I think people are taking advantage of it and looking at it as an option. Economics, you know, I tell people, I said, do you really have extra $50 that you want to spend to do that tillage? You know, those kind of things. So in my area, I used to be the only one, so I was probably 2 or 3%. But now there's an opportunity, I think 30-40% right now of corn stalks I see standing out in the field yet, or a minimal pass, maybe a vertical tillage. I got a lot of guys that asked me about vertical tillage, and I said, yep, I tried it 18 years ago, 15 years ago, and I kind of call it a pacifier. Now that's my opinion, because it lets you do the transition and it gets you to the goal. I don't like it. I don't think it's necessary, and it didn't make me any money, so I don't do it anymore. And so that's one of the things. It's easy just to no-till and strip-till and not have to mess with it. The biggest issue I had with it, it loosened all my residue up, and I don't want that. I want it fixed to the ground so I can work in between it. So especially corn on corn.
Excellent.
Soybeans, it's not even needed. Just put the planter in the ground and plant the beans.
Great advice. So I think there's time for maybe one more question if anyone wants to get that submitted. I'm going to share my screen one more time. For those of you that attended for CCA credits today, I'll also put this information in the chat so you can easily copy my email straight from there. Just get me that information by 5 p.m. today. And hopefully you all have a great holiday weekend coming up. But you can join us again on December 10th. We're going to be focusing on wetlands in the Middle Cedar, as well as statewide with the Middle Cedar Watershed Approach Group. So hopefully you can join us then. So again, CCA credits are in the chat box, and it does look like one more question has come in. How can you get the residue pinned to the ground with a chopping head? So you're talking about the stalks versus the upper residue, correct?
Yeah, we don't get them into the ground. I let my night crawlers do it. So what we're doing is sizing the residue that the night crawlers can get at and the other microorganisms to break it down faster. So it's just, you know, if you leave a whole corn stalk laying in the field, it'll be there for 2 or 3 years. But if you get it split apart and let the pith open up and you get the things into it, it'll break down pretty fast. And the husks and all that kind of stuff, the husk and leaves are gone by May 1st of the next year in my system. Typically all that's left is a few cobs and some stalks and some root buds.
Yeah,
Everything else
follow-up
is gone.
comment here was just that the residue blows away with the strong winds. So any
Yeah,
tips
so
for
that's
that?
one of the main reasons we leave a butt and we leave a stub in there. So I like to leave my stalks at least a foot tall. So it acts as a windbreak and it keeps them in the field as much as possible. The worst time frame for me, the most vulnerable, is after planting. And we had that this spring. We had one of those days when the wind blew 60 mile an hour and it slicked off some of my no-till field. It didn't slick them off. It blew stuff off of them, and I didn't care for that. But it was from the planting process when we cracked them over. But otherwise, we try to leave them in the ground as much as possible. Leave them in between the rows. Trap snow. This year, I usually figure I can get an extra foot of snow in the field that'll melt. That's an extra inch of moisture. So that's what
So
I'm
one
hoping for.
final question for you, Mark. People are curious. Would you mind if I shared your email with them?
Sure, go ahead.
I'm going to go ahead and put that in the chat box. So you can,
I will try to do my best to get back to you.
understanding that you are a farmer yourself and also busy out in the
Yeah.
fields. So.
Yep, and I have a full-time job.
All right. It looks like Al, maybe you had a question. Okay. So
I just got the video working is all.
there we go. All right. So that wraps up the questions that have been in the chat box. Like I said, I put Mark's email in there also with mine. So if you want to direct a question to me, I can get that also sent to Mark and get you connected that way. Thank you all so much for attending today. We had really great questions. Really appreciate all that. And again, this will be, it is being recorded. So we're going to be posting it to YouTube here this afternoon. And you'll get a link with that, with the email evaluation that you'll be receiving later today. So thank you all and have a great afternoon.
You bet. Thanks for being a part.